Hi, it's been a while, but thank you for joining me. We're going to do a portrait today of my friend Torey. So, like any other painting, I start off with drawing, but this is very important for a head drawing. For a portrait painting, I really need to make an accurate drawing. It's different than landscape. In landscape, you can get away with things that's a little bit more inaccurate, right? If you move a tree here and there, if you make a tree taller than real life, if you make a mountain wider than real life, you can get away with it. But for a portrait, you cannot do that, right? Because if you make the proportion wrong, if you make the placement wrong, people will call it, right? Even if they cannot tell you exactly what went wrong, they can feel it is odd looking. It doesn't look correct. And for portrait, to make a accurate drawing is one thing, right? To make a portrait, a head look like a head is one thing. To make the head look like the person that you are drawing or painting is another thing. Now it's quite challenging. So even though I love doing portrait, it usually took me quite a bit of time just to do the drawing. Now after I'm done with the initial drawing, I start to make some more darker indication where the things are. So what I usually do is I just really lightly have the pencil touch the paper and do some very light drawings. And then after I'm quite sure where things are going, I make some darker mark to indicate the shape. Yes, at the end I will erase all the construction lines so they don't look really dirty, so the darker lines will remain as I paint. So you can see I spent quite a bit more time doing a portrait, doing a head drawings, than I'm doing landscape. It's necessary for me, it's very important to do that. I actually tweaked the video so you can see the line better. I mean, in real life, a lot of lines are really faded and you can hardly tell on the video, so I have to tweak the value a little bit on the video so you can actually see. So now onto the first wash. For the first wash, I paint just a general skin tone, and I try to make the first wash as clean as possible, but with a lot of variation, as much variation as I can give it. So I already started to give it some volume on her face, and also mix some warm and cool colors as I give the first wash. You can play with it a lot when it's still wet, right? Like I'm doing landscape, you can give it some more colors and volume. and you can play around with different tones. But at some point when you start to notice the paint is starting to dry, it's better to leave it alone and let it dry. Otherwise you start to get some bad edges. And that timing is not always easy to tell. And a lot of time you feel like you want to do a little bit more. And when that happens, sometimes you ruin something. And that happens in every painting that I do. There are times that I regret that I shouldn't paint anymore, but I still did it. And the result usually end up not looking good. Now I'm starting to do the eye socket. She is a Caucasian, so for most Caucasians share is a strong facial feature. So her facial feature is really distinct, which makes joy to paint. But because of that, we need to make the shadow area pretty dark. Part of the trick to make a portrait look like a specific person is to really get the shadow shape down, because that's what defines a person's facial structures. So we bring the volume down to the side of her nose and to the cheekbone. And I also soften some of the edges as I go. So before it's dry, I want to paint the eyebrow in. So it gives a very nice soft edge, kind of just blend into the shadow. So from the cheekbone plane, I bring that down all the way down to the chin. It's important to know where your shape starts and where your shape ends when you're doing a portrait. Right? Because if you don't think about it beforehand and you just put down your brush, it's already too late, because you can get confused and you don't know what to do with it. And you start to hesitate, and hesitation in watercolor is never good, right? You want to know what you're doing. Even sometimes when you're not sure, you still need to be confident in your stroke. Now I'm painting the shadow of the upper eyelid. But even though this is a very thin shape, I always reminded myself that I'm not painting, I'm not drawing lines, I'm painting shape. Now I start to render the eyeball, so give it a little bit flesh tone in the eye. Try to keep it soft, so I give it a little bit paint and then I soften and spread it out with water. And I paint the iris fairly quickly. I don't spend too much time on it, but it is very important, so You need some variety of the paint in there. And I tend not to make the iris very, very defined. I don't want to fill everything in. I want to leave some highlight. I want to leave some loose brush stroke, because when you're talking to a person in real life, when you look at their eyes are rarely just stay still, right? Their eye sometimes moves a little bit. Even if their eyes look straight at you and not moving, the reflection in their eye can change because their surrounding change. There's people walking, there's things moving. So if you make the eye too still, if you make the eye too, should I say, dead in your portrait, it doesn't look attractive, because the eye is the most important thing in the portrait, right? The eye is the window of the soul. So if you keep it loose and if you keep it feel like it's moving, the whole portrait is alive. Now I'm doing the shadow of the eye socket for the other one. So I start to paint the other eye. This eye is a little bit more away from us, so I try to keep it a little bit looser. But still pretty defined. So what we need to realize is that when we're painting a portrait, when we're painting a head, everything is defined by light and dark, right? Even when we're painting eyes or nose or whatever, we're not really drawing them because there's no line. There shouldn't be any lines in a person's face, right? They're just shadows, light and shadows. So we need to keep that in mind. We're defining the face with light and dark value. So I'm giving her nose a little bit more definition. It has to be darker underneath, so her nose pops out, and then her nose is casting shadow down to her lips. But even though her nose is casting shadow, we don't want to make the shadow too dark on the face. Okay? I took the reference photo in the natural lighting, so it shouldn't be that contrasty. And then if you make the shadow too dark on the face, you know, especially a girl like her, it probably won't look as good. And to be honest, it's always more stressful when you're trying to do a pretty girl, because you try to make her look pretty, so you have a little bit more pressure, and then the more pressure you have, you tend to mess up a little bit more because you're worrying a lot, and there's a lot more hesitation when you paint. But this one turns out alright. I quite like it. So I will say this is the second layer, second wash actually. So during the second wash, I start to give more definition to the structure with the shadow, with the darker value. So I try to paint from cheekbone down to the chin and the neck area. I try to connect the shadow shape as much as possible. If you have so many little shapes on the face, the overall can look very busy. Now it's good to separate some shapes to keep it interesting, but it's also important to have some bigger shape to hold the face together. Okay, now that's dry. I'm starting to do the nostril. Now, we don't make the nostril too dark. Right, that's just the thing. If you make the nostril too dark, the nose will not look good. Right? It just won't look good. So I usually give it a fairly dark value, and when it's still wet, I use some waters and some lighter mixture paint to kind of bring that value out. So it gives a nice transition from dark to light, and it will prevent the nostril to be too dark. And I also use this chance to further define the nose, to give it a little bit more shadow on the side. And then the other cheek. And once I put that value in, the nose start to pop out a little bit more. Some more dark shadow around her eye, her lower eyelid. Just some very subtle shadow there. You don't want to make it too complicated, and you don't want to make it too dark, okay? Because if you make the lower eyelid too dark, it feels like her eye, she has like eye bag and a lack of sleep. She does look she has lack of sleep lately, but that's not something I want to put in the portrait. And now we get to the lip. Try to make the lip one shape, so it have to be done in one wash. But in that wash, I can have different value and color tone. And then I bring the shadow out to the corner of her lips. If you make the corner of the mouth a little bit darker with some shadow, it kind of hints that they're smiling, right? In this photo reference that I took, she is smiling very subtly, so I'll be sure I want to put that in. Actually, she is the receptionist in our office for quite a while, and she's my favorite receptionist. When I walk in, she greet me with this beautiful smile, and she will talk to me a little bit, very, very friendly. She's not a receptionist anymore, she's assistant producer, and I'm really happy for her. She's working very hard, and I think everybody likes her. But I think her new job is more demanding, it's more stressful, so yeah, lately she looked pretty tired. Hope she feel better now. So when it's dry, you can keep building up the value, right? You can keep darkening, you can keep giving more color variation. You don't want to overdo it, but you do want to define the face enough for people to feel the structure, for people to see the three-dimensional quality in your portrait. Okay, so since the face is pretty much done, it's time to do the hair. Now for the hair, I make it really dark. Okay, in this case, because I really want the face to pop out. And hair is a perfect place for you to play around with color, because as long as the value is right, okay, you can push the color a little bit more. So you can see my first stroke is actually very blue, and then I shifted to more of a brown color. Again, I treat it as a shape, as a value shape. So I bring that value shape over to her neck, under her chin, so that makes her face pops out even more. Gonna soften the edge there so it feels like the form is turning instead of a cutout. I use a squirrel brush, and the squirrel brush is pretty soft compared to synthetic, and even though they can form very fine point when you paint, because the hair is pretty soft, they start to split out a little bit, which is great for the hair because you can use that to create some wonderful texture. You can do some like really light hair string with the brush by using the property of the soft squirrel brush and the texture of paper. And that makes the hair look really good. So as you can see, as soon as I put the dark value of the hair around her face all of a sudden start to pop out a lot. So this is a very exciting part because I know when I put down the dark value, the face will start to come alive, right? It will jump off the page. I keep rendering the hair, and I add some more darker value on her hair as it tuck in next to her face. So some more lighter value. And then she's wearing a scarf. So I pre-wet the scarf area, not everywhere, right? Few places, few spots, and few stroke, and then I paint right on top of that before it's dry. So that creates a very interesting texture. You have some hard edges, some soft edges, some very soft shape, and it's the one way to keep it loose and to retain that nice quality of watercolor. Right, this is not the focus of the painting. The focus of the painting is her face and her eyes, to be exact. So this should be remaining loose and playful and a little bit more colorful. So we're going towards the end of the painting. Just a few more suggestions and definitions here and there. Giving the cast shadow of her arm, and there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that. It was very fun to paint, and I hope I will be able to do another portrait again pretty soon, but for the next one I'll probably go back to landscape. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching. If you find this video helpful, please subscribe and visit my website at cafewatercolor.com. Sign up for newsletter to get a free fast-track watercolor PDF guide. It is a 32 pages guide that will help you to get started with watercolor.